Hey everyone, welcome back. Matt Perrin with Carallel here. Welcome back to the October edition of our Caregiver Journey webinar series, where we have conversations, not presentations, conversations about important caregiving topics. Really excited to welcome back John Schall today. John is CEO of Caregiver Action Network. He's also a caregiver himself, and pretty much the best person on the planet we could be talking to about today's topic, which is knowing our rights as caregivers. Hey, John, how are you?
Very, very good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. For anyone that's joining, I'll just got a quick bit of housekeeping here. For anyone that's joining one of these sessions for the first time, Carallel, we're a caregiver support company. We help caregivers in two ways. Number one, with human personalized support over our caregiver support line, and we complement that one-to-one support with My Care Desk by Carallel, which is a digital caregiving hub for all caregiving needs a caregiver could have. So, and we make our service available through health plans, employers, etc. For anybody that doesn't know Caregiver Action Network, number one, you should. Number two, they're one of the nation's leading caregiver support organizations. John and his team wake up every day to improve the quality of life for family caregivers, 90 million strong across the country. So secondly, I mentioned already in our short 90 seconds so far, I've mentioned the word conversation 2 times. And I really mean that. These are our conversations, they're not presentations. So if you have questions, comments, perspectives to share, please do drop them in the chat on your GoToWebinar console. We'd love to get to those. Live is session, we'll do our best to do that, and any that we're not able to get to, I'll be sure to address after the session wraps up. So John, that basically wraps up the housekeeping. So as hopefully you remember, we like to start these sessions just to read the room, as it were. So I'd love to start a quick poll and get a sense for what brought people to today's discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that here. And there we go. Simple question today. How well do you feel that you know your rights as a caregiver? I would have answered when I was caregiving, I don't know them at all, but I have an idea. So I'm just keeping an eye. 20% know them well. 75% are with me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. We got about 85% of the vote in. There we go. So John, 78% of the people on the line today said they don't know their right. They don't know them all. When asked about knowing their rights, they don't know them all, but they have an idea. 11% aren't caregiving yet, but are just curious to the future, and then another 11% say they know them well. Surprised by that? Any reaction to the distribution of sort of the audience's perspective?
Not surprised. I think it's kind of what we would expect. Again, you have to remember that caregiving is one of those things that typically you're in it just because something happened, and none of us really is all that prepared. None of us is born knowing how to do this. So now we're in a caregiving situation, and frankly, we never had an opportunity before to think about what our rights are as a caregiver. So we have a vague notion, but really not much in the way of details or specifics. So I think it's probably, the poll is probably pretty accurate in reflecting how people feel out there.
Agreed. So let's jump into it. And just a quick reminder as we're getting into the heart of the discussion today, we really try and be focused on the practical in these conversations. So today, thinking about this conversation, made sense to me to sort of organize it in a couple of different buckets. On the one hand, there are what I think of as legal rights. We'll talk about those, get John's perspective on those. I'm really, really eager to hear that. But then there are also our personal rights as caregivers, things that intuitively we pretty much know, but are really, really easy to lose sight of when we're in the weeds of a caregiving experience, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. So that's how we'll organize today's discussion. And we'll get started with what I think of as the legal rights, John. And first on my list was access to health information. right? In my case, when I was caregiving for my mom, who was living with Alzheimer's, I was her healthcare power of attorney. I was her power of attorney from a durable perspective, and I just expected my access to her health information to be easy, and it turned out it wasn't. So what would you share with the group here today about access to medical information of our loved one?
Well, it's not easy, so I'm not surprised by your experience. Prepare ahead of time. So there are several documents that the caregiver wants to make sure that they've put in place. You mentioned the healthcare power of attorney. Absolutely, probably most important than anything else. But worth remembering that there are actually two types of powers of attorney, and you really want both. There's a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. So, for instance, if your loved one becomes incapacitated or dementia, you need access to get to those financial accounts as well at the bank and whatever. The healthcare power of attorney won't help you one bit get to those financial accounts, and a financial power of attorney won't help you one bit with the healthcare decisions. So you really need both. A couple other things worth mentioning. It's worth preparing ahead of time with your loved one if they want a DNR, a do not resuscitate kind of order, or a will. I think it's also important to keep in mind, you want to keep copies, genuine copies of these documents with you. I remember very distinctly a few months ago, a family caregiver caring for her father. Her father was in the hospital, a pretty acute event. He had a do not resuscitate order. She had the power of attorney. She was telling the hospital this, and they said, well, do you have the DNR right now? She said, well, out in the car, I can go get it out of the glove compartment. Said, no, that's not good enough. We don't have it right now that we can see it. We have to proceed ahead as we would. And they did, ignoring the fact that there was a DNR. So it does go to show in some situations you actually want this at your fingertips. I'm just going to say one last quick thing here on, access to information like this and your rights. And that's with HIPAA, the privacy law.
Mm-hmm.
Far too often see doctors or health systems almost hide behind HIPAA, say, well, I can't talk to you because you're not the patient, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's not really entirely true. As a family caregiver, you can always talk to your loved one's doctors, giving them the doctor's information, which you should. You're the best observer. You're the one with them 24 hours a day. You're the one who's seeing how it's progressing or not, how the medications are working out. So don't let doctors hide behind HIPAA and say that you can't be a part of the conversation, because sometimes they're just using that as a barrier, and it really is not the case at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something actually I want to touch on, or sort of boomerang back to when we're talking about sort of personal rights. But on that note, I was just going to share from my experience, everything you said, plus take steps to fill out the different forms that are required with different providers, be it a health plan, be it a physician's office, etc. And they seem to all have sort of different names for authorization forms and things like this, but it helped me just to ask for say, I want to be able to access this. What forms do I need to sign? That ultimately saved me a fair amount of time. So great points, John. Thank you for that. These are rapid fire sessions, so I want to keep moving. The second legal right is around leave from work, right? That's the second sort of topic that I wanted to ask you about and have you share your perspective on. What should we know as caregivers about leave that we may or may not have access to, as we're caregiving?
Well, if you work at a company that's medium size or large, basic under the law, if there are more than 50 employees, then you are entitled to up to 12 weeks a year for family and medical leave, which means flexible time that you can take those days to care for loved ones in the family or others. It's not paid, so it's time off for flexibility to do it, but you are entitled to be able to take the time to the extent that you need to without having repercussions for your employment. Very, very important. It's caregiving just happens, right? All of a sudden you may get one of those calls that on your way to work, but mom fell and mom's in the hospital. You probably aren't going to continue driving to work to get to your shift. You're probably going to turn the car around and go to the hospital. So family and medical leave gives you the flexibility to be able to handle those situations.
Right. Okay. So there's nothing for if somebody's self-employed or works for a company that's smaller than 50 employees, there is no bylaw family leave. Am I understanding that right?
Correct. There's no legal requirement. Now that can vary a little bit. Some states will have their own laws, and surprisingly enough, certain cities may have their own laws for family and medical leave. So in some cases, there actually may be for fewer employees, but few and far between. So basically, what you need to count on is if you're in a smaller company, that just has to be worked out as a matter of policy between you and the employer.
Okay. Okay. Helpful perspective. Just a reminder for the audience: if there are questions, comments, personal perspectives you'd like to share, please do not be shy and drop them in the chat under the question section of the GoToWebinar console. One more legal right, John, I wanted to ask you about is related to something that I use. So I'll back up. My caregiving experience was with my mom. At a certain point in time, it just made we determined the right move for us was to move mom into a memory care community. We're fortunate to be able to do that. Every day when I would walk into that community, I noticed a plaque on the wall that was an ombudsman certificate, right? So what are ombudsmen? Are they in all states? I was in Massachusetts at the time. And what sort of help, advocacy, protections do they give us as caregivers?
Ombudsmen do pretty much exist everywhere. Vastly underused, if you ask me, but can certainly be helpful to the family caregiver in working through a situation with a particular nursing home or assisted living facility. It's worth keeping in mind that this is complicated. A lot of people will have issues with the facility that their loved one is in, but they can be quite difficult to address. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities are actually regulated at a state level, not a federal level. So there really isn't a consistent national standard of what needs to be the case. It varies very much state by state. But these ombudsman offices can certainly help you navigate through some of that. But let's not fool ourselves when it comes to nursing homes and these other facilities. It can be very, very, very difficult to resolve some of the problems that you might be facing.
Right. Yeah, and you just touched on something that I think is a recurring theme, right? Which is variance by state. It seems to be different everywhere, which I wish I had an answer or a cure-all for that as somebody who works in every day to support family caregivers, but we don't, right? And so all we can do is share the information as much as possible. And I guess, John, one other thing that we didn't actually talk about, but certainly when I think of varying by state applies, is the notion of family caregivers getting paid for the work that they're doing to care for their loved ones. That also varies by state, as frustrating as that is for family caregivers. But can you talk a little bit about that? About that, just that whole kettle of fish,
Sure.
which
It's one of the
is
most common,
critical.
it's one of the most common questions we get from family caregivers across the country. Can I
Same.
get paid for doing this? Because frankly, it's expensive. There's a lot of out-of-pocket costs that you pay for yourself for things that just aren't covered by Medicare or healthcare insurance or other matters. If my mother has dementia and she's incontinent and I have to buy Depends, well, that comes out of my pocket. No insurance is covering those costs. And that can be, $7,000 to $10,000 a year, according to some estimates. In some states, yes, you can get paid. Few and far between, I'm sorry to say. And it's only in a number of states, sort of a handful of states, that under waivers in the Medicaid program, the family caregiver can actually get paid. Not very many cases, it's not happening a lot. The only state where it's happening on any significant scale is the state of California. So as I said, there are another handful of states where it can happen.
Yep.
But by and large, what's really going to be the answer is, no, you can't get paid, and 99% chance is you're not going to end up in one of those who do get paid, which is kind of a shame, but it just happens to be the reality of where we are. Now, there is an exception in the veterans world. We do actually have a program where caregivers can receive a stipend for being the caregiver of their military veteran. So if you happen to be caring for someone who is a veteran, definitely worth checking into that program. But again, other than the veterans program, these Medicaid waivers, which are used not nearly often enough, and maybe the state of California where it's on some significant scale, by and large, you're going to be out of luck in trying to get paid as a family caregiver. That's the sad reality.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency there, and agree. That's one of the most common questions we get on our caregiver support line at Carallel. I know it's the same for you and your caregiver help desk at Caregiver Action Network. So if people are wondering about that, if you have access to Carallel through your health plan or your employer, certainly give us a call, and we can sort of talk through that with you and provide some pointed guidance. And likewise, if you don't, give the Caregiver Help Desk a call at Caregiver Action Network, and they can provide the same support to help you think through that question, because it honestly can be a dejecting one, right? Because you mentioned the reality of the situation, but there's still a possibility. So it requires sort of work to
Absolutely.
do that investigation and all of that sort of stuff. So, okay, last thing on legal rights, John, is, and this isn't law, but there's big news earlier in the year with the National Family Caregiver Strategy of 2022. That announcement, that's very, very early days, as I understand it. I think it's still in the public comment stage, but can you give people a minute or two on what that could mean, what that means now and what it could mean in the future, I guess is the better way to put it.
Well, it's an important step forward for the federal government, but it's a bit of a modest step. So basically what we've had for years is the federal government really hasn't put together in one place whatever efforts can be done on behalf of family caregivers. But finally, looking at the model for the National Alzheimer's Disease Strategy Act, I thought, well, maybe the time has come to look at it from a family caregiver's perspective as well. Now, it took several years to put this report together that just recently came out, and it ends up being a fairly long laundry list, I guess, of elements of the federal government that do something on behalf of family caregivers. What it did not do is recommend new areas that would cost more money or new money to help for family caregivers. So it's certainly a start and a big step forward for the federal government, which has kind of been far too silent on this matter for a long time, but doesn't go all that terribly far, and really doesn't get us to real policies yet. It does have a lot of good suggestions that I think can be followed up on, and also is a good list for state governments, because a lot of states are not waiting for the federal government. Some states are actually implementing policies for family caregivers ahead of federal government policy. And, that's a bit of good news. So, a modest step forward, absolutely. Anywhere near enough? Not yet.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate you putting a finer point on that, because I forget the exact page count, but it was something like if somebody that's on the call today wanted to go through and read it, it was in the hundreds of pages. So appreciate you sort of giving that distillation.
It's long.
Okay, so let's segue now to sort of the personal rights bucket as caregivers, and as I think about sort of this bucket, I really truly do think of these things as, man, when I was in the midst of it, these are all kind of obvious things, right? The things that I kind of just I knew somewhere deep down, but gosh, was it really, really hard to lose sight of them when you're in the midst of a caregiving experience. So I think it's worth talking about. And the first sort of ties into something you were mentioning earlier, John, around access to medical information. But that's the right as a caregiver to be included, not just included, but at the center, along with your loved one, of course, but at the center of the care team, not on the periphery out on the edges, right? This notion of being at the center of the decision making that's taking place as it relates to the care of your parent, grandparent, spouse, partner, friend, what have you. So can you talk a little bit about that, John, and give me your perspective on our right?
Sure, it's a perfect point, and I think one of the most important ones there is, and one where family caregivers really have to assert their right. Family caregivers are a vital part of the healthcare team. We're not an add-on. We're not secondary. That really there are three vital actors in any healthcare situation: the patient, the healthcare professional, usually the doctor, and the family caregiver. And the family caregiver needs to be a vital part of that triumvirate from day one. Now, healthcare professionals aren't always inviting family caregivers to be a part of that. Certainly much better now than they were years ago. But you really have to insinuate yourself to make sure that from day one, you are part of that process. The fact is, as the family caregiver, you're with your loved one, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Far more hours than your doctor spends with your loved one over the year, which is probably a handful of hours. You're the best observer of side effects of medication, how a condition is progressing, getting worse or getting better. You're the one seeing changes in their behavior. You are the best source of information. So not only do you have a right to be there from the beginning, but there really is a responsibility. And healthcare professionals have to realize that our perspective as family caregivers is invaluable. It's irreplaceable. They need it as much as they need anything to provide the best care for their loved ones. In a lot of states now, there's actually a law that has put this somewhat in place called the CARE Act, where if you're in a hospital, the patient can actually name the family caregiver to be included in the health records. And the hospital then has to not only include that family caregiver, but make sure that when it comes to discharge of the patient, that the family caregiver is somewhat prepared to be able to handle that care at home once the patient has been discharged. So, some progress definitely has been made. But for every family caregiver, please keep in mind, you have a right, indeed a responsibility, to be at the very center of this healthcare team. You're one of the three crucial members. And if you're not invited to be a part of that conversation, get in there and make sure you are part of that conversation.
Yeah, I love the way you put that, John. And this one's really important because I not to say everyone has this experience, but my experience, I actually got a little bit intimidated at the beginning, right? Here I am having an eye-to-eye conversation with, a medical professional, and they went to school for however many years, I didn't, all of that sort of stuff, right? But remembering and continuously underscoring to myself some of the points you're making about no one, essentially I'm boiling them down to no one knows my mother in my case better than I do, right? Um, and that's critical to what's being discussed, what's being decided, so on and so forth. So I love that point.
They have their expertise. You have your expertise. You know your
Exactly.
loved one. You know the home environment. You know any number of things that the doctor couldn't possibly know. So never underestimate the value of the expertise that you have. It's a different type of expertise from theirs, but every bit as important.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, but when the next right is to ask for help and receive help, right? And this is something we talk about a lot. It's a hard thing. It was for me. It's a hard thing to ask for help for a lot of caregivers. But thinking of it as a right, I feel like could be helpful, right? And that's not to say you always get the help that you need, because heaven knows we don't. But asking, we have the right to ask always. You agree with that?
I like the idea of calling it a right because, this is difficult stuff. None of us is
Yeah.
born knowing how to do all these caregiving challenges. We do need help. Um, I would like to take it one step further. The right to ask for help, the right to ask for very specific help. If you're
Yes.
a family caregiver, it'll probably drive you nuts over the course of a year, is everybody will say, oh, whatever I can, just let me know. You kind
Right.
of get tired of hearing that. You want specifics. So
Yep.
when you're asking for help, make specific suggestions to those who are willing to help you. If that
Yeah.
means bringing over a meal one evening so you don't have to worry about that, getting the lawn mowed, uh,
Yeah.
watching your loved one afternoon so you can just take 4 hours and recharge your batteries. Get to specifics when you're asking for help because it'll make all the difference in the world in getting some help from those who, sincerely want to, but just don't really have an idea of what they can do.
Right, right. Yeah, and I love how I couldn't agree more on the specifics piece. And one thing that I got in the habit of doing later in my caregiving experience was in down moments when I wasn't sort of feeling like I was on the edge, right? In relatively calm moments, I got in the habit of keeping a list of needs. Um, so that when I was asked or when I was feeling on the edge, I could refer to the list. And the list was, to your point, relatively specific. It wasn't just I need a break or I need this or I need that. It was pretty pointed, and that really helped me. Um, One other, and we're not going to get to all of the personal rights, but I think one hugely important one that we should cover before anything else is uh, actually the right to smile and be happy and to laugh. All of these things, in my opinion, fall into sort of the bucket of live life, right? While we're caregiving. And of course, that is easier said than done because caregiving for someone that we love changes our life fundamentally. It reduces the time we have for ourselves, but that doesn't mean we can't take time for ourselves and enjoy those little moments. You agree with that? Think I'm crazy? What are your thoughts on that, John?
You're not crazy. In fact, it's hugely important to do exactly that. Last year for National Family Caregivers Month, which happens in November, our theme was #caregiver and where, we wanted people to remember by declaring, yeah, I'm a caregiver of my mother-in-law who has Alzheimer's, but I'm also a person who is a mystery novel buff. So you don't lose touch with those things that make you happy, those things that are your
Yeah,
passion in life, because that's what drives all of it. And lose touch with that isn't going to make you a better family caregiver, it's going to make you a worse one. So it is
yeah.
very important to stay in touch with those things that give us joy, that give us satisfaction, that really get us moving every day of our lives.
I love that, John. I love that. And I loved that campaign. Can't wait to see what you guys have in store for this November. That's coming up right around the corner next week, National Family Caregivers Month. Excited to see what you come up with. Time flies when we're having fun, John. We're at the bottom of the hour. These things go quick, and really, really appreciate it. I guess any parting parting shots on this conversation to share with the group, John?
Well, I will just give a little foreshadow that when National Family Caregivers Month begins in a few days, our campaign will be hashtag caregiving happens, because it's exactly what all of our lives really are.
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden something just occurred, and whatever I was going to do that day now goes by the wayside because I'm in a caregiving situation.
Love
And
it.
that's how these. Otherwise, let me say, you know, what a joy this has been, Matt. I really enjoy these conversations. I'm always amazed how much we can cover in half an hour, and I think it's probably very for people.
I hope so. I hope so. And I share your sentiment, John. I really enjoy it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll see you next month. It's happening November 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern. I'll be talking with Zara Everly, who's a pharmacist, and we'll be talking about 7 tips to make managing medications easier. So really looking forward to that. John, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for being here. We'll talk with you all soon. Take care.